Good morning, a happy morning to everybody. We are so thrilled and excited to have you here with us this morning. I can see so many people here in the chat. Please, can I ask our audiences to please put in the chat where you are from, what you're all about. Is it your first time to join the Conscious Leaders community? Welcome to the ladies and gentlemen. This is a place for human empowerment, responsibility, and sustainability. And we are super excited to have you here with us as we are going to unpack the happiness report. Now, my name is Carmen Murray, and I'm the founder of Conscious LeadHERS, but I'm also a marketer, which means in my day-to-day, I'm all about understanding human behavior, solving complex problems with creativity, data, innovation, and technology. So a little bit more about Conscious Leaders, for those of you that are new, is this is a women in leadership network, as I mentioned, all about human empowerment, responsibility, and sustainability. And we are really focused on staying conscious and educating ourselves so that we can become an army of critical thinkers in the times that we are living in. Now, I am thrilled to have you join us today for a timely and deeply human conversation as burnout, loneliness, and emotional fatigue increasingly mark our collective experience. We gather to reflect on a seemingly simple yet complex question. How happy are we really? So we're anchoring today's conversation in the World Happiness Report. It's a global barometer of well-being, but more importantly is we want to explore the lived reality behind the numbers. So I would like to ask our amazing friends of Conscious Leaders, our panelists today, to please bring yourself forward that I can introduce you. Give them a round of applause. Let's do some emojis. Let's get excited. This is the emoji day, right? We are going to talk happiness, so let's enjoy our reactions and tap into the emojis that we have. So thank you so much for being here. We are super excited. Without further ado, we can get started. I would like for our audiences to put down in the chat, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? Put it in the chat for us and let's see what you have to say. But now I also want to introduce 3 incredible leaders that has been part of the Conscious Leaders journey, but also they are also experts in their fields and can bring so much value to this particular conversation. So first, I would like to introduce Christyl Potgieter. Now, Christyl Potgieter is a leader in the edtech space, but also in the technology space. She's a data analyst, but she's also an educator and empowers professionals on the core of transferable skills and helping them to navigate uncertainty and transition with confidence. Then we've got Shaleenah Marie, and she is an award-winning leader in the tech space and within learning and development. She heads up this within a tech organization, but she's also a coach in behavioral change, and she is one of the top 100 influential women in technology, a mentor, an educator, an advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And she has led transformative programs for the UN Women and beyond. And now we also have another friend of Conscious Leaders, which is Dharshni Padayachee. She is a phenomenal leader, also within the diversity, equity, and belonging. Sorry, my tongue, domknoop, as we would say in Afrikaans, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space, and also very passionate about well-being. And she has really been instrumental in this space and also award-winning within the financial sector. And there's another caveat to that, is that Dharshni has also got this beautiful thing called Table of 12, and she's the founder of that, bringing diverse voices of women together, of storytelling. And it's really also where I met Shaleenah, to be honest, is around this Table of 12. So without further ado, a warm welcome to each one of you.
Thank you so much, Carmen.
Thank you, Carmen.
You're welcome. All right. So before we get started, I think I just want to create a little bit of context around the conversation. So For those of you that are not familiar with the World Happiness Report, the World Happiness Report has been published annually since 2012 and is led by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and powered by data from the Gallup World Poll. It ranks countries by their self-reported life satisfaction scores, evaluating factors like GDP, per capita, social report, health life expectancy, freedom, generosity, and corruption perceptions. But while this report gives us insights at a national level, we must ask, what does this mean in the era of an emotional recession? So I would like to give you my take. Before we dive into this data and dialogue, I want to begin with something we all chase, yet rarely stop to define it, which is happiness. Happiness is often sold to us as a destination, a perfect job, a number in a bank account, a tropical holiday, a checkbox ticked. But happiness is not a finish line. It's not a constant high. It's something far more profound and more human. Psychologists describe it as a subjective well-being. Neuroscientists like to explain it as dopamine and serotonin. Philosophers call it the pursuit of meaning. But what I want to offer is a simpler idea. Happiness is not the absence of sadness. It's the presence of wholeness. It's those quiet mornings where you feel safe. It's laughing at something completely silly. It's the moment when your heart expands just by being near someone who gets you. And ironically, it's often felt most vividly after we've been through something really, really hard. Happiness and sadness are not opposites. They are dance partners. One teaches us to feel, and the other one reminds us to heal. And together they tell us we are alive. So, as we begin this conversation today, I invite you to be curious, not just about the world happiness, but your own. What does it look like? Where does it hide? And most importantly, what would it take not to chase happiness, but to make space for it and plan for it? So, without further ado, let's begin. So, I'm going to pose the first question to the panel. And what I would like to know is, when you peruse through this report, what surprised you? What insights challenged your assumptions? And what have you been sitting with or reflecting on since reading it? So I would like to start with Marie, and then we can move over to Dharshni and then Christyl.
Okay. So what struck out for me the most is that one of my core values is kindness, not as a soft skill, but as a powerful driver of connection and culture. So the wallet return experiment really stayed with me, where wallets were dropped to see if they would be returned, and most people returned the lost wallets to their owner. But what was most surprising in the stats was that people were very skeptical of wallets being returned and assumed others are less kind than they truly are. And that gap between actual kindness and perceived kindness really intrigued me. It made me reflect on how many systems, especially in work, are built on distrust, not belief in people's goodness and intentions. The report reminds us kindness isn't rare, it's underestimated. And believing in kindness is itself a predictor of happiness. And this affirmed what I've always felt. Kindness must be more than a personal value. It must become more, and it must be no surprise if someone returns the wallet. The real surprise is how often we forget they will. And that's the opportunity to lead, design, and live as though people are inherently good, because most of the time they are. And another quick interesting insight is Africa's unique position. The life evaluation in Africa is really low, but emotional happiness is really high. And this reflects the idea of cheerful discontent, low life satisfaction, but high positive emotion, which brings us to our great Ubuntu philosophy. I am because we are. And it emphasizes community, empathy, generosity, and connectedness. Africa scores high on pro social behaviors like helping strangers, even outperforming Europe, except in the donation of money. Sharing meals, social bonding, and family life are central to African happiness. So, despite low rankings in life evaluation, Africans report high happiness, highlighting the role of culture and social structures. Thank you, Carmen.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We'll go around the room and then we'll tackle it. Darsh?
So I think mine was very similar as well. It was around the report finding that we are more pessimistic about benevolence than we actually are. So again, back to the example of the wallet, and more people would actually return the wallet than wouldn't return the wallet. And I think when I sit on it, maybe it wasn't that surprising after all, because if we look around us, I mean, newspapers are designed, or news is designed to sell sensationalism and almost the bad news stories, right? So if that's all we surrounded by, that's all we start thinking that there is. But it takes a lot of intention to actually start thinking of the good things around you, the good news stories that actually do exist and aren't making the headlines, because, that's not what's going to sell. So I think it comes down to, look for the good stories around you and you will find them. So when I reflected around the pessimism, I think it's easy for us to get caught up in, well, one bad thing happened to me versus actually 10 great things happened as well. But we almost designed, or our brains are designed to focus on the one bad thing that then shapes how we think around that. The other point that Shaleenah talked about around community, and one of the striking things from the report was the effect of having dinner by yourself and the impact on loneliness. And, we see the impact on loneliness around the world, where I think it was Esther Perel that said we can have 1 million followers, but no one to feed our cat. And we're seeing that impact on a younger generation as well. And we are in South Africa, we are lucky that community is so strong for us. And it's such a strong value and a value driver. And so that process of coming together, of getting together physically, of having dinner together makes such a big impact on loneliness and happiness as well.
Wow. Thank you so much. Beautifully said. Christyl?
Yeah, so I am going to try not to ramble. There's a lot going on in my brain. But I remember reporting on this this report stats for the first time in 2017, and I've been following it every year since. And then when I reread or read this year's report, I have to say the word benevolence, because I am familiar with the term benevolent dictator. And so I was like, what the hell? What is this benevolence? So I had to Google it, and it literally is a synonym for kindness, FYI, learning a new word. But I think one of the things for me that struck out was there's such a correlation, even though it's not mentioned explicitly in this report, between Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people's basic needs being met, and then the level of happiness. And that is especially true in the Nordic countries that year after year after year come out to be the happiest countries. But I mean, they have so much social aid in it. And I just thought about all these different things that they have, like maternity leave and like housing allowances and social allowances and everything from government. And I think that leaves a lot more space. This is just through my own reasoning. I think that leaves a lot more space for them to actually reach for self-actualization and to think about different things, because they are just not bogged down all the time by survival. That who mentioned it, Shaleenah, the discontent, the happiness discontent. I think we as South Africans, or we become so just like set in our ways, kind of like, this is what it is. Except if you actually work through and do the growth and decide I'm going to be intentionally happy today. I'm going to seek out the things that stick out for me, that the world like throws in my path every day to make things a little easier for me. So I actually have a note section in my notes app on my phone that says good things happen to me every day, and so I record something every day, even if it's like I didn't stub my toe or my cat didn't scratch me today, like tiny things like that, and it all adds up. But the other thing that also stood out was that Dharshni mentioned also meal sharing. Like the more meals you share in the week with people, the happier you are. And I thought about it. And I think it's also because it takes you forcing yourself to communicate with other people. You, one, have a tendency to have these deeper conversations where you connect on a personal level, but you also kind of get out of your own mind and think, oh, this doesn't just happen to me. I'm not alone in this. Other people are also experiencing this. And I think that takes away the loneliness factor. Yeah, there's a lot of other things, but I want to hold space for us to have a collaborative conversation.
I love what thread is coming out there, and something that's so uniquely African, the Ubuntu spirit, the kindness economy that we carry here within Africa. You know, so many times, and it's so true, if we look at media and propaganda, and especially what's happening in the world, we're starting to see how those you know, how it works and how it's exercised on us. And I think this is almost allowing us to go into the future with our eyes wide open, and also recognize our brothers and our sisters next to us and say, okay, right, you know what? We actually want to get along. We standing united. We want to stand united. And I think it's sometimes taken for, you know, it's something forgotten. And I think the whole world has this narrative in their head of what we are about. You know, I was having you know, a TikTok dive-in last night, and I was going through all these TikTok videos and For Your page and what's been happening, because I've actually had to take a little bit of a digital detox to preserve my happiness, because I feel like there's a lot of toxicity happening out there, and I just remove myself from it, regain my energy, and then I engage again with the rest of the world. And one thing that always fascinates me time and time again is what perceptions people have of us here in Africa. I feel like we're walking amongst in the wild with wild animals, and that we don't have water and we don't have electricity, and we are just so terrible. But we are actually so resilient, and there's so many beautiful things about what we do. And I would like to maybe go around the room and ask you, what is the secret essence that you think we as Africans, and especially South Africans, bring to the table that the world might not be aware of?
Oh, can I go first? Sorry.
Yes.
So I love there's this a lot of the comments on TikTok of anything happens in the country and it's like political or something, where people say being born in South Africa is a choice, because we do turn everything into a joke. But I think we use humor as a way to cope. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. We are such a positive country, where even if you stand in a queue to vote, even if there's different opinions and everything, we just still come together and connect on a human level.
I love that.
So I so proudly say, and I love the country so much, so many different reasons. And one, I mean, in the going into winter and the sun is shining, what is not that makes us happy. So there's that the physical element of it, but I think it's the warmth of the people. You know, recently, I mean, last week here in Johannesburg, there was a really horrible incident that happened around like human trafficking, and a group of boys that were found. And what I saw, as sad as the story is and horrific as the story is, I saw a group of South Africans, or lots of South Africans, getting together to say, how do we help these young boys who aren't even from our country, who are here with nothing? And I just saw this outpouring of kindness and humanity that came through. And, you know, as South Africans, we should be so proud of.
I love that.
For me, South Africans' friendliness, whenever anyone comes to South Africa, the first thing they say is, wow, South Africans are so friendly and so helpful. And I also think it's about African people just generally being so resilient. No matter what comes their way, they always find a solution. They are always
Mm.
problem solving. And no matter what happens, they just always have a smile on their face, which warms any, foreign guest into this country. So for me, that's what stands out.
I so agree. And, I think as also a person that's traveled globally, so I've even worked in the States for 4.5 years. I have to tell you, there is some essence that we have that just can't be replicated. And it's very easy to look at some of these global reports, and I'm just going to be honest, but I mean, you see a lot of global reports, and then you wonder, is it really true? Because is it really reflecting who we are as Africans? Because sometimes I feel there's a lot of biases around who we are as Africans, and those reports don't necessarily reflect who we are. What is your views on that?
So, sorry, go.
No, Dharshni, you can go ahead.
Right.
No, I was just asking if you were directing it at me. So I think there are a lot of misconceptions about South Africans, but I think now that we are more on the global stage, we are unpacking those perceptions, and we are ensuring that the world knows us for who we are as South Africans in terms of the value that we bring, and in terms of the beauty of Africa, and even making so many foreigners wanting to visit Africa and South Africa.
Dharshni?
Now, I think I was going to make a similar point about being visible on a global stage now. So, technology helps us in that way as well, in that, so we live in a global village, and South Africa is highlighted in that global village through our exports, amazing people around the world that are bringing visibility to the real South Africa or the real Africa versus what you would use years ago in a movie, in a very typical or stereotypical what South Africa or Africa was. So I think that globally we've taken our place on the stage, and rightfully and authentically taking our.
Christyl?
So I think due to social media, and I actually looked for a quote this morning, people are getting to see a lot from an actual personal perspective, who we are as people from different nations. So previously, we got our news from newspapers, if you are older than or millennial, and also like reading news websites and everything. But I think now there's a quote that said, TikTok saw a rising in uptake to 53% this year of people who get their news from TikTok, up from 22% in 2020. And we have a front row seat to real-time unfiltered views of people who actually just share, this is what it's like in my country. You maybe saw that report that a certain publication, I'm not going to name names, but like completely positioned from a different perspective, or like sensationalized. But this is what's actually going on. And I think even though there's a lot more noise, I think there's a lot more vulnerable, authentic truth out there if you let your TikTok algorithm get aligned correctly.
100%. It's so important to reset your algorithms all the time, so that if you see that what you are being fed, because you can just click on one particular video and before you know it, you have an algorithm feeding into this negative narrative. If we just look at the biases that we usually see within the algorithms, especially we as women, there's many research studies that has proved that we actually get served 75 times more negative news. So for us as women, we also have to be more vigilant, knowing that, the ethical side of technology is compromised. and we need to take that into consideration in our digital behavior. But I really want to move into our next part of the conversation. So what does happiness look like beyond economics? You know, we are seeing this massive rise within consumers wanting to be more conscious, wanting to make more informed decisions. How do we define and measure happiness in our personal lives, workplaces, and communities beyond income, GDP, and job titles? And I know that this is a challenging one, but this is becoming a very relevant conversation that is happening within the digital universe. So, Christyl, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, so actually, I had a conversation, with a friend the other day. My brain is moving faster than my mouth can. And I remember when I was younger, I used to at the end of every month when the new magazines came out, this was pre-COVID when print was still in full swing, I would go stand in front of the shelf and like look at the Cosmo and the like whatever all those magazines were. And I remember most of the headlines were get 35% happier. This is how to improve happiness. And I was always drawn to those because I always thought I can be so much happier. But the thing was, and I've done some therapy, obviously, is that I was comparing myself against other people and I thought their success was my failure. And that is such a learning to also take in that stay in your lane. Like comparison is the killer of all joy. But to get back to the actual point of what does happiness look like, I think it's having deep, meaningful relationships, having those connections, having people that you can have no holds barred conversations where you don't feel judged. And I think that is there's a stat in the report that says young people, especially like 19%, it's up to 19%, feel so lonely that they can't turn to anyone. And I think it's due to this phenomenon that we live in of like, you're so in such a digital age that we don't have those authentic connections anymore. So I think happiness for me personally is seeking those out and prioritizing relationships that give me energy and that like is reciprocal.
So I want to maybe touch on what Christyl said about the magazines, but what I was thinking more around was the fairy tales that we told when we were growing up, or the movies we watched, and you get the sense of it has to be happily ever after. So, Carmen, I think you alluded to it in your intro as well, that we sometimes see happiness as a destination, but I've maybe through age have learned that it's about flow. It's having your life in flow. So you can't be deliriously happy all the time, or happiness doesn't mean that you're in a good mood all the time. Happiness also means you can be angry, you can be sad, you can feel all those emotions that we were learned to, or we were taught were negative, but they're not negative emotions, they're just emotion. And so happiness is a state of being for me. It's every day learning to find that flow. It's about being present in a moment. It's about, taking a moment to reflect on joy for the little things, like over the weekend to have an hour by myself in the morning to have a cup of coffee silently is a moment of joy. The whole day doesn't have to be a day of laughs and celebrations and happiness, but it's those little moments where you can pause and reflect and go, really, I was really in that moment in time, or I can, my day doesn't have to be seriously all the time. So for me, it's not not this thing that you take one of your checklist items to say, hey, I've achieved happiness. You're actually setting yourself up for failure as well.
Shaleenah?
Yes. For me, happiness beyond economics is about connection, contribution, and meaning. And in our personal lives, happiness is belonging and being valued. And in the workplace, it's feeling psychologically safe and having growth opportunities aligned with purpose and being part of a people first culture. And in the World Happiness Report, it confirms that emotional support, social trust, and freedom to choose matter more than money alone. And as learning and development leaders, the real question becomes, are we actually designing systems where people feel seen, supported, and where they have purpose in life and can contribute to something meaningful?
I so love that. I mean, if I just have to reflect on my journey with Conscious LeadHERS, like it's my moment in the week where I get so happy. It's my happy juices are imploding. And it's just like I get so excited just because of the community that we've managed to create. And, you know, it's a sense of belonging. It is exactly that. It's just a place where you can feel safe, even if it's just for an hour or two in the week. There is a space for that, and that's enough just to get you going for the rest of the week. And I remember I saw a post many years ago, and it's always stuck with me. This Olympian, she was training for the Olympics, and to manage her mental health, her coach said to her, you need to manage your training and your planning and getting ready for the Olympics in 3 areas. It is happy days, okay days, and crappy days. They all need to exist in order for you to become resilient. So plan it almost like if you're experiencing 33% happiness, 33% crappy days, and 33% okay days, then you're on the right track, because then you are building yourself for growth. However, if it starts tilting where you have too many happy days or too many crappy days, that's a problem, because there is something then wrong in the way that you are viewing life. And not that I'm saying that you have to be, but happiness can't exist without sadness. And you can have both at the same time. You can look at what's happening in the world around wars and seeing the injustices that are happening, but we also need to tap into our joy, plan for joy, as you all have mentioned, because by doing that, that actually is the energy that shifts us into a more positive mindset that we so need in the times that we are living in. So I want to move into our next question to the panel is, whose happiness is being prioritized and whose is being overlooked? You know, when we look at the report through the lens of gender, culture, age, and inequality, what do you notice about whose stories are heard and whose are hidden? Dharshni, I'm going to start with you.
So I think the concept of stories is interesting. It's because the stories we hear are always going to be around the most dominant groups. No matter what that group looks like, or whatever characteristics that group has, those are the dominant stories that we're going to hear. And the stories aloud, they're not always the only truth. And so that's where the danger of the single comes in. And when you spoke about it earlier, your algorithm starts feeding own stories. Confirmation bias tells us that we start looking just for those stories, what I believe. And it takes a lot of intentionality for us to go and find the difference. And here's where, you talk about changing algorithms. I also speak about going out and finding people who are different to you.
Yes.
So, what does people offer? Do they all look like me? Do they all think the same? Do we all each other? Because if we do, that's an issue. It means we aren't integrating the diverse voices into our teams, into our communities, into our social circles. And so, I mean, I definitely to you who's being excluded. Definitely, when you look around the world, you can see there's dominant groups, dominant stories, and you've got to be intentional about, how do I find the difference? How do I make sure that there isn't the danger of just a single story? Sometimes it could be as simple as changing the news channel that you listen to.
Yes, and chances are your devices are anyway listening to what you're listening to at home. So, you've got to think a little bit more wider around. It's not just what's happening on your mobile phone, but it's the discussions that you are having. It's who you're talking to. It's the radio in the background. It's all of those conversations also feeds into your algorithm. So it's so important to surround yourself and be very intentful about happiness, especially in the tech age. Shaleenah.
Yes, so for me, youth happiness is being overlooked. 1 in 5 young people report having no one to rely on. Despite us living in a very hyper connected world, their emotional needs, aspirations, and sense of belonging are often missing from policy and program design. And if we want a more sustainable future, we need to put youth at the center of well being strategies. And that would mean designing programs such as peer learning circles that normalize vulnerability and support, including purpose exploration and well being coaching very early on in their careers, also embedding mental health literacy into onboarding and education as a foundation, not a reaction. Young people want more than just success. They want to feel seen, heard, and connected. And prioritizing their happiness now builds stronger, more resilient systems in the future. Designing programs that build social support networks, including mental health literacy and offering meaningful engagement, and incorporating well-being coaching, peer circles, and youth-focused empowerment can actually counter loneliness and disengagement for this specific group of youth.
Love. Well put. Christyl?
Yeah, I want to say, Shaleenah, that was fire. That felt like a quote from a McKinsey article. I think whose happiness is overlooked. I think so. They put a lot of emphasis on young people and on the older generation, like over 65. And I often think about in a country such as South Africa, where we have such an economic divide, economic inequality. Old Mutual puts out this study each year. It's called the Savings and Investment Monitor Study, and they talk about the sandwich generation. And it's this group of individuals who take care of children and the aging parents and still have to make ends meet. And so I think it's overlooked in terms of how pressured people in middle age, like after the age of 35 up to the age of 65, how pressured they feel, not in terms only of finances, but in terms of keeping relationships alive and like being mentally active and thinking about your mental health. Like that's a luxury if you have to have such a big mental load that you need to take care of. So yeah, that's the thing that stood out to me, is that and that's what alludes to Dharshni's point again. It's that we're not that dominant group. So or the middle age at least. So I think that's something that we can, even though we're still a very economically active group, something that we can look to policies and
I so agree with that. And I think it's so important to embrace duality and to say, okay, right, that is what DEIB is all about, right? It's to see who's missing in the room, whose voices are not being heard. And one thing that, especially around this conversation around happiness and talking around emotions, it is also very important for us to recognize that suicide rates have increased specifically for men as well. And what can we do in order to also be more supportive to men? We had a podcast the other day called MPhil 2, where I've interviewed 3 gentlemen about their mental health crisis and how they managed to work through it and get on the other side, and how much work needs to happen to support men, because it's more difficult for men to tap into their emotional sides. For women, it's a lot more natural. So do you have any ideas around how we can also create more inclusive and sacred spaces for mental health, specifically for men as well?
Carmen, I think so. My take on it would be one, the first thing is, I think as women, we feel responsible or maybe overly responsible, right? So we've got to be cautious around that
Mm,
we are taking responsibility for other people's happiness. What we need to do is help to create the space for people to be empowered, to have the conversations. And I think that needs to happen with spaces for men as well. How do we help create spaces without taking away that power, without being overly responsible, but
mm,
find the and the stories that we could elevate, where we could help create that space, and for them to be able to build that space for themselves. I think it comes naturally to us as women. We naturally create community. We speak more easily about our emotions, largely, or we find another female. And I think that finding, I think what you do is great, elevating those stories as well, and normalizing those stories for men. So without taking responsibility for happiness, how do we help create those spaces, create those conversations, and elevate those conversations? We can do it personally and work.
beautiful. Shaleenah?
Just to build on to what Dharshni said, mental health is crucial. So government should actually destigmatize mental health issues. They should improve services and also have community projects that bring in the youth, bring in young people, and help them to realize that they can be vulnerable and they can speak about topics that impact their mental health.
I love that. There was a study that I heard about, the fMRI, where you can see the activity in the brain and how everything is going. And they were doing an fMRI study to see how people make decisions, but they needed to have a baseline to say, okay, right, when we are not asking you to do an activity or to make a decision, we're asking you just to sit still and just don't think about anything so that they can have a proper baseline. And what they have found, surprisingly, in this study was when you asked people to quieten down, their brains exploded. And it was just like overthinking, and there was just so much happening inside of the brain. And they were like, what is going on? There's more activity when they were actually making decisions and doing these activities. And what they have found is that all of the people that were in these studies were thinking about the things that they have to do, the future, the holiday that they want to go on, and all the things that they're planning. And I want to tap into mindset and how important it is to also be present, but also when we start thinking about the future, is not to get wrapped up into these narratives that are sold to us, these fear tactics that are used to get society to almost feel crippled and paralyzed. I think that is also a major contributor to unhappiness, is people think that the worst of the worst is about to happen. And perhaps there's a mindset issue that we also need to be cognizant of. Darsh, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I think mindset is really common, and I think it comes back to looking at history and the way things were for a particular reason, but it doesn't mean to stay that way. So a lot of it is asking, why was it relevant in that point in time, and is it relevant for us now? I looked at the history of women in the workplace and how we started entering the workplace, and it was around World War, right? When all the men had to go off to war, and then women had to start taking on the roles that men would traditionally do. So certain things served a point in time. We reach a point where brain power or intellectual power is the ultimate power. It's not physical power much anymore. And so we get to change and question, why is it that things are still done a certain way? Does it have to be that way? Could it be another way? And I think a lot of power in that question. Could it be another way?
I love that. Christyl?
Wait, sorry, my internet dropped. What was the question like 2-3 minutes back?
So we're talking about mindset, so how easy it is for our minds to go into the future mindsets and being present, but also, how we think about the future is just as important.
Yeah.
Get wrapped up in negativity.
Yeah, so I would have a super fan badge for this. I often spiral. I'll start to think about something small, and then I'll find myself at the end, and it's like an apocalypse. And I think one of the things is like that techniques where you kind of bring yourself back and you like ground yourself, and it's so important. And you mentioned that if MRI thing, Carmen, I think that's the same thing that happens to me when I try to meditate. It's like 17,000 things, like, because, oh, you have capacity now. Let's think about all these things that you never want to acknowledge. But I do think what helps me is to have that intentional downtime before bed, like no scrolling. I don't always stay true to it because I also have fear of missing out. But having those intentional pockets of, I'm on a social media detox, I am not reading anything right now, because to like 1 hour the US markets might tank and you're like, what's happening to my retirement? And then like 4 hours later it's like, oh no, it's fine, it's gone back up again. So it's like, what is the use to actually like get ourselves freaked out about every little thing? I think, yeah, I've made a conscious decision to step back from geopolitical news specifically, to just digest a bit less of it because of the impact that it is having on my mental health. Yeah, but it's still important to know, so there's always going to be that catch-22.
Yeah, and it's so important what you're saying, because in order for us to be change agents, we need to understand what's happening in the world. We need to know what's going on in the world, but at the same time, we have to preserve our own mental health. And I've read somewhere that, for example, if you read the Financial Times, or you read, a news publication, is read it once a week and you'll be up to date, and just find those resources that can keep you up to date what's happening in the world, that you don't have to go down these rabbit holes, to preserve your mindset for happiness. Shaleenah?
Before Shaleenah goes, can I just add to that to say,
Yes.
We're not saying bury your head in the sand and deny in the world. What we're saying is know your own limits and be self-aware to know when you need to step back or when you need to switch off. But it doesn't mean bury your head in the sand and be in denial either.
100%. And one of the deadliest sins of leadership is being myopic and being short tunnel vision and not understanding what is happening in your world. And this is so important. In order for us to be leaders, we have to understand what is happening in the world. Absolutely agree. It's not that ostrich syndrome. Shaleenah?
Yes, so I agree. You have to understand what is happening in the world, but also based on what you are working on right now. I think that the human brain is not able to multitask or think about so many different ideas, and that is where we bring stress to ourselves. There's a time and there's a place for different topics, and we should allow ourselves that space to know, okay, let's work on this, be intentional, be in the moment with this right now. Later on, when I have more brain capacity or I'm more less stressed, let me focus on a different topic and think about it. I think by overthinking, that is what brings more stress into our lives. So we need to just exactly what Dharshni said, there's a time and there's a place for when you do different thinking topics.
But you see, this is why diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is so important. Because now, if you look at me and Christyl, we are very open about the fact that we have ADHD, right? So we are always like antennas and gathering information. And then I look at Dharshni and Shaleenah, and they're just so grounded and like so zen. And if we around people like that, we are actually finding ourselves to be a lot more zen, right? And this is also something that is contagious, is to have people that have different mindsets around groundedness as well, because it helps to calm the collective. I think that it's such an important aspect to this. I'm just looking at this whole scene being played out right in front of me. But I want us to move over to a few of the questions from the audience, and for us maybe to focus on this last section also around how do we plan for joy, how do we bring it into our workplace, our careers, our personal lives, and takeaways of how we can actually go and implement it. So I just want to quickly have a look. If this is coming from Kate Wardle, and she says, if you are a team leader, what tips would you give to create psychological safety for your team members and colleagues? I.e., how do you build happiness into your team? I'm going to pose this to Dharshni, and then we'll move to Shaleenah and then Christyl.
So, hello, Kate. Carmen, if you ever want to know all about neurodiversity, actually, Kate is your person.
Hey, you always need more information on that one.
Again, I want to say, as team leaders, we are not responsible for the happiness of our employees, but we are responsible for creating the culture and an environment enabling to our employees. And that's where inclusion and belonging comes in. So inclusion and belonging doesn't mean that we need to be everything to everybody either, because our organizations do have guardrails, our teams do have guardrails, but it's how we're creating an empowering environment. How are we giving each person what they need to thrive in what they do and to give them the best chance to succeed in what they do? So psychological safety is a term that's thrown around quite often, but it really is an important term because it starts with psychological safety. It starts with creating the safety in the team to allow me to be myself. And it's such a, I mean, we could do a whole other podcast on this, but it's such a complex thing, but it also can be very easy as well. It's about putting the guidelines of our team. How do we want to behave? How do we show up to each other? How do we show care and kindness with each other while still getting our jobs done and while still being successful at what we do and while still delivering on what we need to do? So it's a big conversation around the culture we create in our team, the respect that we create for each other as well.
Love.
Thank you, Kate, for the question. So I think we're very uniquely positioned to shape cultures as leaders that are not only productive, but also compassionate, connected, and human-centered. So this can start with small intentional acts in every day, like opening a meeting with a gratitude round or a emotional check-in. You could host a purpose lab where you help people to align their work with values and purpose, their values and purpose. Also, perhaps creating Thrive circles, which are peer groups for empathy, support, and shared growth. And training managers in compassion led feedback will help to build trust. And these aren't massive structural overhauls, they're human moments that multiply because when people feel they belong, they show up, they grow, they thrive, and so do our teams and organizations. So that would be my advice to you.
Christyl?
I think, yeah, to echo what Shaleenah said, I think creating opportunities for people to engage in meaningful work and have the freedom in terms of, I mean, I've been flourishing since remote work has been a thing. But if a person is aligned to that, to allow them to work in that space, to not be micromanaged, and to find things that really create those pockets of joy throughout the day, and that can kind of balance the, oh, I don't really want to do these monotonous admin tasks with, oh, I love this kind of work, and it all balances out at the end of the day. So yeah, I think taking an interest in actually finding out what it is that fuels that employee and or that team member, and trying to create opportunities for them to attain that and to succeed.
Love that. I would like to add, have a brag book. In one of our
Ooh.
workshops last week, we were talking about, or it was a few weeks ago, about how to overcome imposter syndrome. But I think when I started doing research on it, it really helps you to build your own confidence. And by building your own confidence, it's also just in your brag book, is not only to put in, you've met a KPI and you did this amazing thing and you just like won all these awards, but it's also your beyond your professional wins, is your mindset wins, where you've managed to really keep it all together in a meeting when you were actually ready to explode, or thinking about what is those emotional wins, how you've changed the environment or things around you, or the outcome of a situation, and really keeping tally of that, and the creative wins that you've had and the growth that you've had. Because once you start doing that and start actually advocating for yourself, you look at yourself through a different lens. And every time when you're feeling unhappy or you're feeling a little bit out of sorts, is to go back to your brag book and remind yourself how awesome you are and the brilliance that you come with. So I think that, that is also something so important for personal happiness. I know all of us are very much into also our affirmations and keeping ourselves in these positive mindsets, just so that we can remind ourselves, to remain positive. I think I'm really also fascinated about frequency of emotions and studying the frequencies of emotions and how impactful they are. So I like to share this example with you. Many years ago, I did an experiment where I took an apple, cut it in half, and I put it into 2 jars. And the one jar I called the love jar, and the other jar I called the hate jar. Now, I know it's very extreme, but that's what the experiment said you had to do. So I took this jar, and for 11 days, my entire family, I said, all of you hold the jar, and you have to speak positively to this half an apple in the glass jar, and then you have to speak negatively to the other jar. Anyway, by the 3rd day, speaking positively to that love jar, a little plant started growing out. The other one started getting very, very sweaty. I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. The impact we have on our external environment by our mindset and how happy we are, how sad we are. And anyway, as time progressed, I think it was by the 5th or 7th day, something happened that really made me angry. I was really upset. And instead of letting it all out, I went to this jar and I held this jar and I held it so tight, and I was like, and I just expressed everything that was going on in my mind to this jar. I then decided to go for a half an hour walk, came back, and the jar popped. And in that moment, I realized how we have such a huge responsibility as leaders to work on our own energy and to work on our own mindset, because it has an impact whether we can see it or not. You don't even have to speak a word, because in the end of this experiment, I wasn't talking to it. I was thinking my words towards these jars. And I think that for me is such an important lesson to learn around maintaining happiness in the midst of everything. I want to close off. We have maybe one more question. I'm going to give it to one of you to handle. How would you describe or find happiness when life isn't going your way? Well, I understand that sometimes things happen for us and not to us. How do you hold on to happiness and faith when everything seems to be falling apart and you're starting to lose hope? And this is from, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Uviwe Dana, or Dana, Uviwe Dana. So perhaps Dharshni, can you take that? And then if there's time, we can quickly finish it off.
I just wanted to make the point also on your Apple example, is to be conscious of how you talk to yourself as well. So
Yes.
how often
Yes.
do we say positive things to others, but we speak negatively to ourselves? And so that self-talk is really important. But how do you make happiness a thing? Like I said, I think it's about flow. It's about not always expecting to be in a good mood or happy, and allowing feel the other emotions as well, but then having the resilience to bounce back. Like Carmen said, it's not about having all bad days or all good days, because then there's an issue as well. It's about really finding that flow. Find your people, find the people that you can go and lean on and talk to. It might be the people in your workplace. It's not always family. It might be somebody else that you need to go and find. But find your people that help you to get through the tough times and who celebrate with you in the good times as well.
Love that. Shaleenah, parting thoughts?
I will just add on to Dharshni. I think happiness isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And it begins when we choose connection over isolation, purpose over performance, and belonging over hierarchy. So let's design systems and learning spaces where happiness isn't something we chase, it's something we cultivate together as a community.
Beautiful. Christyl?
No, I think that was perfect. Well, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I want to thank you, Dharshni, Shaleenah, and Christyl for joining us today. And really, this was such a beautiful and rich conversation. And I think that it has really just expanded this idea of the happiness report. I want to encourage our audience is to be kind to yourself, be kind to one another, and always just remember, you know, that together we are in this and we can actually be the change that we want to see. And it starts with us. It always starts with us, being audacious inside out. So thank you also to our incredible audience for joining us today and being part of this. The recording will be available. We'll put it on YouTube and also publish it into the podcast. If you're unfamiliar with the podcast, you can just subscribe to the Conscious LeadHERS podcast, and then you'll get a notification once it's dropped. And then, yeah, that's it from me. I'm Carmen Murray, your host today, and it was just a privilege to spend this time with you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dun, 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 dun. Woo! That was amazing. Thank you so much, ladies.